Hello, and welcome to my lovely, inspiring human potential community. To everyone tuning in, before we get started on today's topic, that is in pursuit of those keys to inner growth and following your heart to the life of an entrepreneur, and to much more that I talk about, guide about, from the podcast to the blog to other online presences which are known to those who continuously tune in. Special announcement: Anchor has allowed finally that listener support button, which means the world for everything that I pursue and wanting to share, and for those who are looking to support the inspiring human potential mission, its purpose, and anyone who believes in general in inspiring human potential, because that's one of those amazing things we can do, and the online world has brought us to be able and do connect, support, and together we will achieve that harmony worldwide. So if you wish to contribute because the inner growth process mindset has contributed to your life, or because you believe in inspiring the world through these different means, please do so. Thank you so much for doing so. And as always, you can reach out if you want to collaborate, if you want to share your story, if you have a personal development process mindset, something that can contribute to others in their unlocking of their untapped, unlimited potential. Reach out to me. The blog, luna12780.com, has my email in the About section. And let's move on to today's topic. As always, the lovely online community has at heart us online entrepreneurs, content creators. We have many different names, but we are all here to inspire human potential in our unique way. And for the inspiring human potential community, we have new podcast patron members only episodes coming this year, because Patreon has started something to support the podcast community, and we are going to use that in a way that expands the inner growth learning material and the ability for you to follow your heart, applying the things that we discuss in our daily Anchor IHP podcast show. So inner growth mindset, lifestyle choices, the journey, the way that you can work through anything that is arising at first as conflict, but that those who tune into any of the material, whether the podcast, the blog, or the website, know that's the opportunity for inner growth and for you to follow your heart. So I look forward to hearing from you all for this first round. It'll be the first year that we have patron members only podcast episodes. With your feedback, I'm sure we will continue to improve and expand all the material that is meant to inspire your higher human potential. I look forward to you joining us. Before we begin today's topic, I would like to share a bit about the foundation of all of the inspiring human potential inner growth content. What you learn about and what we discuss has its foundation in a lifelong accumulated research that involves the fields of humanities and social sciences, philosophy with a focus on existentialism, and recently added basics of neuroscience, physiology, and biology. This research continues, and the wealth of information that I share across different platforms is in the effort to support your inner growth, self-empowerment, conscious living, ascension, awakening, and personal development journey in a way that allows you to understand the distinct human characteristics involved in your day-to-day and overall life, alongside the choices you make, how you feel, and deal with events such as the unknown and unwanted. A simplified breakdown, just to give you an idea, and for the IHP community to keep in mind as you pursue inner growth and self-empowerment, is what is involved in the human's response to day-to-day events and life happening. We have been able to review this, and we always review some aspects throughout the episodes and all the content. 1, the body's nervous system's defense mechanism, flight, fight, response. 2, the heart's feelings, emotions, ego, self-response. 3, the mind's conscious, subconscious, and conscious response alongside the established neural pathways, societal culture and knowledge filters, identity, secondary and primary consciousness aspects. This and more is what is involved as you tune into and read the IHP content, whether it be on the blog, the YouTube channel, patron membership site, or the website itself, or the podcast. You will always get to learn something about how to apply an inner growth mindset and lifestyle approach, how to follow your heart and lead with it, with that unconditional love, neutrality that we so much discuss, why it's important. And all of this allows you to tap into that infinite higher human potential, which is also a response that one acquires as a body, mind, and heart that is one within you with that ownership. The topics we discuss are always so varied, meaning I think how many different ways I could present something, and in what ways to support not only you being yourself. Obviously, that's the main goal, but being yourself with the knowledge of coexistence. And this is where, while before having the nervous system's foundation, I could only conceptualize with that choice from consciousness, you choosing to be kind, to be loving. And that's where you can lose people, because essentially it's a concept, and not everybody looks at humanity with unconditional love. And by looks, I mean looks and feels. I do because I chose, and because my upbringing gave me the opportunity to choose what already resonated with my heart. And upbringing meaning Jesus and God. And here's where we're gonna get to the blind spots. This transcending blind spots by transcending generalizations is about you always knowing you're driving from your ego, but with neutrality. And every time you're presented with information, right now, I was just reviewing some stuff, and I'm like, how are people supposed to get to neutrality when everything that is being presented to them is keeping a very specific focus of the external, which is with fear, is an enemy, whether it be life and oh my gosh, be careful for resisting or this or that, or whether it be humans, strategically think of people who are evil and or trying to get you. Concepts that I get because, again, I'm a political science major, international relations and diplomacy masters. I knew what I was going to do if I entered those fields to help humanity, and so I began an approach of strategy, not to mention that we all deal with people, so we all get to know different egos, and it was very clear that people are not aware. So the biggest blind spot for every human being is their own ego, and nothing outside is actually pointing to, at least again, the material I've seen, in a way that says, now that you're an adult, now that whenever it is you're choosing to actually pursue conscious living, personal development, anything and everything, those ego mind and ego spiritual based leaders, they give you this to-do list, and then they basically break things down, and this is where you're not creating an ownership mindset with the responsibility of your actions through your words and through your feelings. And not to mention, they're not providing you with the complete way that you can achieve a state of neutrality from the nervous system, meaning your actual sense of ease that your body has always sought, because you had already primary consciousness from the minute you began interacting with life. In fact, I was reading something about the brain development. I have it, but I don't know where the spot is, and plus I don't want to bore you guys with that technical verbiage, but it describes we're senses. It literally says everything you're experiencing. I'm like, finally, because it's a mass media magazine, so I'm like, at least it's getting out there. because you don't see the counselors that are talking to people about narcissistic behavior and all of that, being compassionate and furthering to teach the body element, the part of ego, which is sensorial. It's not this thing that's ever going to be extrapolated and removed from you. In fact, it's a part of you, and it's always reacting as you began your life's journey. And here's the very firm tone, because it's beyond me as a human being that for so many years I thought of concepts as valid versus what they really were, which, yes, it's valid, they're valid, but they definitely held my brain back, my way of being able to expand. And so time is of the essence, meaning we don't know how long we have to live, and everybody has passions. One of my passions, not only humanity, but knowledge. The fact that I had lived so many years in a specific space, because there was not one person that was able to speak of concepts and just educate, not tell. It is very much quote unquote irritating, because these people are also considered leaders. So if I think of leadership, there's a very specific image that comes to what I thought of and still think of as leadership. Somebody who empowers, who educates, who goes all the way. And so not that you're giving me some surface popular, because there's popular psychology, like all this stuff, and then, mass media again, and the same leaders criticizing potentially individuals, or just this entire quote unquote, for me, for sure, waste of time of our lives, of the human, species and what we could be. But again, what's the word? Transgress. I digress into what is a personal feeling and opinion, and not the key components of today. But the key components would be all of that blind spots of a bunch of different egos that aren't aware of their egos, and that aren't really conducting their leadership for the benefit of humanity as a whole, but they're conducting their leadership for their specific focus, which, again, their specific focus is their topic. My focus has always been, I want to help people. I want to help humans to be themselves. So obviously that is where I need to remember my focus was in that space, which is why it ended up evolving to the space that it is today. And hopefully it'll help you guys with generalizations, because see, this is where the generalizations of leadership, they're one personal, because it's my own opinion, but there's also text, there's also material that shares the same ideas. Leadership should empower. Leadership should educate. I'm not, the only person who is irritated with being told what to do. I have many conversations with empowered individuals that are in my life, and all, even the ones who don't recognize their own ego, but they are the average, the mass. Everyone that I've ever spoken to has something to say about leadership and not being happy with it. The thing is, we're the ones who create the position. We get into the positions, and that's the entire picture. Anyways, they're human. They're average. They're not leaders. They lead because people want something to follow. Not really. It's because of that whole societal engagement and nervous system's response. And yeah, as you're growing up, you don't know about life. So besides your parents, you're going to start looking up to your teachers and or people that you read about, even movies, heroes, those songs, and your life is made from the mind with all of these aspects. Now, if you're able to get a hold of your ego sooner than later and begin to say, okay, these are my opinions and that I'm coexisting, you allow yourself to transcend the average, and your mind will begin to be able and relate to your life from a sense of ease, because you're focusing with inner growth in mind and following your heart, not staying in a repeat cycle with people that are presenting to you the same interactions over and over and over again. And this is because you accept whatever they show you, since you know there's not a threat. there's not a threat. Somebody can lie to you, they can cheat you, they can be strategically trying to sabotage your job. The hypotheses could be a gazillion. The beauty of it is, 1, they're hypotheses. 2, that's a waste of your time and energy. 3, it creates a defense mechanism in your body that stresses you out. 4, that's you not taking any sort of action in a way that is at your best because you're emotionally involved already. The minute the emotions are in a space of defense mechanism, you have cut your efficacy from your brain in like half, because you're now using what you learned from when you were little to when you were teenager to then young adult, and it's all in that same verbiage. Whatever it is your leadership is, it doesn't matter. They're all in duality. There's barely anything that I've found that doesn't have a duality approach. The only part that I find informative when I'm reading something is the academic books of any type of subject matter, and still you can see the definite opinion and hypotheses of those individuals, but there's data points, so you can actually gain information that can help you to expand the way you're seeing something and thinking about something. That's for the empowered ego. So the person who's not seeking information to be told what to do because there's a fear that you have not become aware of, but you're actually aware. Of course, I'm afraid I don't know something. This is important to me. See, this is where you are inner stimulated. Life is about you. It matters because it is your life. And so you're not having people tell you what to do, meaning you're actually with ownership seeking that information versus I really, really want help. I really, really feel scared. And there isn't anything wrong. Anybody who's new, this is a neutral space. It's information trying to present concepts and feelings and things that we deal with as human beings in a day-to-day, and say it's natural to be in this space. And that's why we have so much information, which even if in duality, that's how we learn. In fact, duality is part of existence. Essentially, we exist as an individual and the external exists. So there's duality, naturally speaking, because you're your own person. But before you actually feel 100% at ease with being that whole person, you're going to get to evaluate on your own, if you choose, aspects that have been given to you. And that's where the blind spots are again, with generalizations. When somebody will define themselves according to that pop psychology, even if it's a full-blown academic psychology, if you are only using the information as a way to categorize you, that's creating not the complete awareness of the ego, because the sense of ease that comes from accepting who you are is that second layer. The first layer is your actual body, but not everybody is paying attention to personal growth, conscious living, and that type of development with the body and mind. We get to integrate it on the episodes, and the community does, but for anybody, again, who's new, this is the first time that you're probably hearing about it, and you may or may not want to integrate it. But it is important for us to remember the community, and again, anybody who's new, your flight-fight is what is organized from the 0 to 2 years of age. This is where the emotional brain hemisphere is the first part of the brain to develop. And so when you're getting angry and or sad and or very, very upset, you are beginning to engage in what is your flight fight. You've organized all thinking, all your data points time and time again. The rational brain hemisphere begins to develop at the 3 years age mark, and your first societal imprint are your parents. They're going to teach you who you are to society and what society is. And this is where the average, again, so an average household will teach us how to coexist, will teach us that the world doesn't revolve around our own person. And so that ego, it gets taught to coexist. But the feelings, that's where they're only breaking down into the feelings. They're not actually going to the deeper layer and saying, okay, so these are the feelings and how we can relate to them. Now let's pay attention to the body, and are you at ease or not at ease? Because the feelings are on the surface, if you will, and really The ones that are in the quote-unquote negative realm are all in your flight-fight mode. You're starting to get agitated. You're not in a comfortable place. You're not safe. And here we have that cognitive dissonance. Anytime new information comes and somebody starts to get emotional and irritated about it, the way that the one snapshot that I've read to you already again yesterday, because it's really important as it's describing what happens, flight-fight is happening. Because when you begin to engage in flight-fight, your emotional and rational brain hemispheres don't work together. Only the emotional brain hemisphere, which is the seat of your flight-fight. That's the whole point. And so this type of information does not get associated to the part of getting upset. What gets associated is, well, you're right to be upset, because if you're dealing with this, narcissist, then obviously you're going to have to be upset because they're a jerk and they're this. And so we create evil monsters out of each other, and people stay in those generalizations. And that is where it is a blind spot, because one, you choose the people you can have or not have in your life. Nobody forces you to have people in your life. Even family, there's people who cut their family out. So unless you're being held against your will, and when that happens, usually the police comes about and takes you and hopefully saves you, like I'm just saying, the stories that are created to stay in these mindsets with humanity. It's literally a movie, but you're playing it in your own life. And then the leadership is not changing that leadership, quote unquote, again, because there's different groups of us, and the different groups definitely are not tuning in to that type of information. But there's still, even in the new type of information, a group of people that continue in a different way to present the same generalizations. So we've discussed 3-dimension, 4-dimension, 5-dimension. That 3 and 4 both have fear, because both have something outside that can threaten their existence. And this is where for the 4D, that may be new, talking about light and angels and this and that, spirituality, but there's darkness. And this is the space where then when I'm seeing them share information, I'm like, you're just creating more fear. You're not actually helping people to achieve 5D with what you're presenting them. 5D is a state of unconditional love. But then there's also to say the individual is for sure somebody who has a sense of insecurity immediately, and to recognize it, there's a necessity for the person to actually have a feeling that is loving and or at least neutral towards humanity in life. So a stronger feeling that there is more. And why do I say that? Because as long as there's any wiggle room for you to think that there can be strategy in such a way that will bring death to you, so to speak, that will threaten you, you will have a sense of fear. There's no way you can trust. There's no way you can have a sense of ease, because already in your mind there is an inch, a piece of sand, a piece of, something that says, I don't know if I can trust. It's the one blind spot that is continuously supported by those very ego mind and or ego spiritual based leaders. And this is where the community, I'm most certain, that keeps on tuning in here is the community that, like me, you had that feeling when, the world presented to you this evil thing. You're like, well, I'm not really sure. And you kept moving forward, meaning you're like, these generalizations, I get it, but then again, I don't get it. And it fits like a very tight shoe. So here's where the ability to see that every person was their own person was very clear as a child when I was taught not to cast a stone in my catechism, and when I was taught about turning the other cheek, and my heart immediately resonated with it. This doesn't mean that as I grew up, those things that happened did not affect me emotionally, but I was taught what to do when those things happened if I wanted to conduct myself in the quote-unquote right way. Okay, and again, it resonated. The unconditional love resonated. So those generalizations, even though in my mind it was clear, and as psychology became a part of my information bank and existentialism, it became clear that the human has a very big insecurity, like many with their ego, subconsciously speaking. So I learned actually compassion because of that, because I'm like, well, they're weak, they're afraid. Can I expect them not to be afraid? And for me, faith was something, and still is something positive. But even here, there are those who are in my same faith, and they are not turning the other cheek, and they're definitely casting stones left and right, and not in soft-spoken ways, but they're actually creating what I would define as quote-unquote bloodshed. So that's like, it breaks my heart when I see that, because that's totally not, but they will go and have their data points from the very scriptures that are part of the religious institutions. And so here again, we get generalizations, but we really get the different ego-based groups which exist. And every person makes sense of what they believe. So here's where, now that I have that nervous system's breakdown for the community who is inclined to be in this place of neutrality and unconditional love, in this awareness that there's more, I actually can offer, okay, so we can conceptually talk about unconditional love, and then we integrate sociology, psychology, existentialism, but now we also have an understanding of how our body works and this sense of security. And so when you are reacting with upset towards anything, cognitive dissonance. So I'm going to read it to you guys before we keep going. Cognitive dissonance. This is why people get upset when their beliefs are challenged. A mental conflict occurs when beliefs are contradicted by new information. This conflict activates areas of the brain involved in personal identity and emotional response to threats. The brain's alarms go off when a person feels threatened on a deeply personal and emotional level, causing them to shut down and disregard any rational evidence that contradicts what they previously regarded as truth. And although the term is not used very often, every person that I've ever met actually can have this happen. Depends on the topic, but see, again, as a teenager, I began learning what not to do to create an upset, because I didn't want to upset somebody, especially once understood that it has everything to do with their subconscious and conscious. So it has to do with fears, it has to do with insecurities, it has to do with lack of self-love, lack of self-worth, lack of direction. It has to do with all of, I don't know what the heck to do, and I'm going to react aggressively or upset or depressed or again, spitefulness. So these behaviors we all begin experience. That's the part. We experience them as children, and we get taught to be kind, or some will teach, okay, take back. So an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This depends on our environment. Either way, this doesn't change, quote unquote, the outcome. In fact, independently from the outcome, as long as it's not unconditional love, meaning that you embrace all of humanity and do your best to move beyond the generalization by acknowledging that any generalization is based on your own opinions. And yes, there are average generalizations. So if that's what you follow, then you are part of the mass. So you're not your independent thinker, you are part of societal thinking. When those generalizations will change within society, which will happen because there's universally accepted concepts. Right now we're going through major transformation, which I'm already seeing the new generalizations that are coming forth for every group. So here's where the person who transcends their own ego and achieves empowerment is able to have a look at the bigger picture, because you're not reacting with cognitive dissonance. Information does not threaten your identity, because your identity isn't what is outside of you. Your identity is simply you. You have gone through all of those layers, and they're not even that many, because the layers of your identity is very simple. You've been given it by society, and it begins with your parents. The only reason it's quote-unquote hard for people is because when emotions come into place, which they will, because the ego is wanting societal engagement, nervous system's first response. When you're an infant, it is by seeking out the help of your parents, which is why they either gave you a sense of comfort or didn't, and you didn't achieve always a sense of comfort, because there's not like a perfect match on every topic. So there might have been a couple of things that you would have wanted to do that you got told no. And those are those first traumas for the psychologist when they talk about ego and the individual. It has always been there with you, and the first time you get told no, that's trauma. Not to mention your physiological immediate trauma to being negated food the first time. So you weren't fed immediately. Your body was already organizing the flight fight. The minute you're getting left to cry for a little bit, you don't know what's going on. This is the sense of insecurity, and it will follow. In that journal that I was reading, this mass consumer magazine that they sell in the supermarkets, that's exactly what they said. Like, your first time of having something like that happen stays with you, and you can be aware of it simply by now you know. And really what you want to pay attention to is that body, because it's either tense or it's not. And if it's tense, you can bring a sense of relaxation, and you're immediately helping yourself to disengage from a defense mechanism that holds you back. It holds your mind back from being able to explore further. And so here, the topic of today is essentially for the people who are looking to transcend generalizations so they can remove blind spots, which means you do know that generalizations create blind spots. This reminds me of my sociology class. It was about gender, language, and gender, and we reviewed transformation of words in time and how they went from meaning one thing way back when to then meaning a whole different other thing. Which always makes me a little bit, laugh, because it's fascinating to see how patriarchy has continued and still to this day influences so much, which is the new generalizations. They're not happening in a very specific, balanced way just yet. Right now, we're going to the complete opposite. So our new generalizations are actually in a very big space that is not neutral towards one group of people. And although there's a reason for it, that's where that repeats a cycle. So it doesn't bring equality. It doesn't bring harmony, because one extreme is not going to bring harmony. That extreme is going to create a group of people that is hurt, that is going to be treated in a specific way, and eventually that will need to regain balance once more. The balance is about a very specific type of cycle that takes place within life overall. And here's where, for the unknown elements of life, people may say, but why? Well, I'm sure that if one day I get enough information on that energetic spectrum, so vibration, hertz, and all of that, I'll be able to explain it. But at this moment, I will simply say it's, it's one of those things our books talk about, right? So if you overdo anything, it creates an imbalance, which then creates a disruption, which then creates destruction, but then there's a rebuilding. And some would say that's how life is always. So cycles are part of life, which makes me laugh a little bit, because if cycles are part of life, at least what you can do for your own life is to keep moving forward without repeating the same cycles, which is instead what people do when they stay in their blind spots. And the only reason they're staying there is because they are not paying attention to their body and feelings. They're paying attention to the feelings, but they're using the mind and societal culture, so what you were told in your ego groups, to fit into those boxes. So you may not say you're a generalized individual, but if you are sticking to speaking about things with generalized statements and not acknowledging that they are generalized, because as always, acknowledging is what creates the opening. Once you acknowledge my ego is involved, this is my opinion, I'm creating a generalized statement because, yes, I've gotten information from these many sources. However, I know that there's probably a gazillion other sources as well, And then you simply remember, I'm only one person, and I'm sure that there are others who have a completely opposing view. This is where you're not having cognitive dissonance, because see, the information that opposes yours isn't threatening. You're actually knowing that all information plays a role in life because it exists. You're not asking why. The why is for the ones who are reacting with fear, and in fact, they're not listening to new information. They're with ego battling it, and they are attacking it, and they are ignoring the fact that they're in that space because they have a blind spot. The part of the patriarchy, it is very clear, the unfairness. I mean, I, as a woman, when I was younger, definitely, if I have to, I'll call myself a feminist. There's no doubt about it. Even if I know that I'm not in that space, because I love all humanity and all people are equal, as are all living organisms. But I know that this is an effort that all of us have to do together, and there's not that many people that I see who are completely in a space of love with humanity at all. If anything, they continue to repeat the same types of imbalances because none are seeing that they're not being loving in their approach, and that they're being emotional, and in fact they're all reacting with ego when they're emotional. And that's the very minute, though, their emotional brain hemisphere is what's taking place. So I can't be, it's gone even beyond the whole subconscious unconscious. It's an actual, their brain is not being effective. When yesterday I was telling you guys about the intellect, I don't mean it to be like the number of books and data points, you know. When I think of intellectual, it means a person who has an open mind, can take in information, so there's no cognitive dissonance. They're aware of their emotional state, and they're in fact in a space of neutrality so that they may pick up and gauge everything. So to me, intellectual means a human being who's always open-minded. And by being open-minded, there is a requirement of their ego not feeling threatened towards any new information, but instead being able to, in the very instant new information is coming around, to integrate it because they're actually listening to what's being presented, since they're not threatened. Their identity has no threat. People's opinions doesn't kill you. The only reason it feels like it kills you is this cognitive dissonance, which is connected to your flight-fight response. When we learned about the breakdown of the nervous system and the body keeps the scorebook, we learned that it has three main responses. One, it's in defense mode from the moment you're born, which is only normal because you have primary consciousness from the moment you're born. Means you feel there's something outside of you, even if you're not consciously aware of it. You become consciously aware that you're not one with your mother at 6 months, the first night terror as a human being, all of us. The body, though, is experiencing and knowing, sensing things. So you either feel a sense of comfort again or you don't. The nervous system's three main responses: societal engagement, flight, fight, freeze, pause. Freeze, pause is when your emotional body will shut down, and that can happen if you're left unattended to cry for days on end. All information shared by scientists who study child psychology, sociology. I don't remember who was part of the different documentaries that I've seen, but definitely they worked with children, and they were showing how that ego is involved, how development is involved, and this is all in the conscious subconscious. Okay, then with our neuroscience, we're gaining a lot more information that is going to help, but it's just, even in this magazine journal, it's just beginning. So they're just tapping into the same thing with the gut. And so that visibility is going to support a lot of new ways to be able and work with ourselves. So far, this isn't changing these generalizations that keep people stuck in blind spots. But the minute you are allowing yourself to pay attention to the emotion and you stop reacting, but you start reflecting, is the minute you can allow yourself to transcend generalizations and to actually remove completely blind spots time and time and time again. And it is with knowing that you are always driving from your ego. So before you get to actually drive with visibility, there's a level and layer of getting to know what your reactions are emotionally, which you already know probably, because anything that pisses you off, makes you very sad, puts you in a bad mood, that you will fight about. So the part of feminist, I learned slowly to calm myself, and I've told this story to the community before, because I recognized when I'd get it wasn't only passionate like you heard at the beginning of this episode with firmness. I would get very, very feisty. So my mother would always tell you, calm down. So thanks to her, I'm like, okay. And usually it was with family members, but it was on topics of independence as a woman. And I remember I didn't like it because my brain wasn't working at its best. I couldn't get through the information that I wanted to get through as I got angry. Not to mention that it didn't feel good in my entire body either, and it wasn't unconditionally loving. So I had 3 areas that immediately called my attention. Okay, this isn't positive. But the number one was, it's a representation of an insecure ego, which I most definitely am not. I know what I'm speaking about. So anybody who likes to think of themselves as secure, well, guess what? Whenever you're reacting with anything except for flow, you're flight fight. Your defense mode is up. You're defending, and essentially it's that society engagement. So as a child, when you're looking outside of you for confirmation, you're doing the same thing. Now, there are those who will justify getting passionate and angry because it's a feeling. And this is why I love having the nervous system's breakdown, because, it's a feeling. It's a feeling that comes from your societal engagement reaction and flight fight, actually, because you're feeling threatened. Again, cognitive dissonance. Let's review that. A mental conflict occurs when beliefs are contradicted by new information. Somebody tells you they believe the complete opposite than you. That is contradicting. That is not necessarily new information, but the minute you begin to have an emotional response, that's where you can become aware. You are reacting with ego. And you will continue to be in that mindset that has become your habit, because we have neural pathways in our brain. So our brain needs to conserve energy for the different functions it has. And the way it establishes neural pathways are because those become those recurring thoughts. But really, it's because the brain's trying to ensure that you have energy for everything. So if something's a routine, and that's where, again, the leadership is why I'm totally disappointed with the leadership, because they're bringing about a very specific limitation to the possibility for an individual to see beyond, even though we have new information, this content, and other people that are potentially speaking of it this way to help people to see. Your brain wants new information. It can have new information, but you're the one who needs to see that when you're creating those hypotheticals, so generalizations on what's going to happen because you've seen specific patterns, the whole strategic part and seeing humanity as evil, that begins when you start getting into your different relationships as a teenager. Because while as a child they're simply telling you how to coexist, it is once you begin to interact on your own and have your own personal relationships that you begin to apply. And once more, if you're not in a space of an empowered ego, so you're wanting to drive your owner seat, but you are reactive and you are the tendency is to go with your peer group, because as a teenager you're going to be looking to identify with your peers. A lot of kids that I know and I knew and now are adults, they have their group identity, and they are some where they're meant to be. I can sense it as sensing that higher potential, but without the generalized judgment. I don't judge people personally, knowing that every person has their own journey. There's a very specific feeling that comes when a person is their person. That is a sense of ease. You feel the complete expression of them, and you feel the genuine opinion. Doesn't mean they're perfect human beings, and quote unquote nobody's perfect. But what I mean by that, it doesn't mean they're not spiteful or arrogant or that they don't have specific types of traits. But here's where the 5D individual, whoever is tuning in that is in this space, knows exactly what I know. They're not mean, evil. They're not being labeled by the 5D person. The 5D person knows these are souls, people, however you want to term it. You know that that's their journey. That's it. They don't have a physical life threat. Them being themselves doesn't threaten your day-to-day life. What threatens our entire day-to-day life is if our water and air gets ruined, if we don't have food, if our countries can't get together and work things out. For every country, there's a system in place that, yes, can be improved, but the point is there's a system in place, there's authority. And so right here, once more, generalized statements and ideas keep people locked up in a very specific way of living your life that does not allow you to transcend the blind spots. So let's remove these blind spots. Generalizations include anything, and it isn't because there's not validity. In fact, I have had this conversation before with people where they say, well, if they exist, they must be true. And going back to my language and gender class, we talked about stereotypes and generalizations. And in fact, that the professor themselves said, as long as sociology keeps on studying what they're studying in this way, we won't ever move beyond, because they acknowledged, of course, smart people acknowledge duality keeps people doing the same stuff. It keeps things divided. It doesn't create unity. In order for unity to be created, there is a balance of two sides, which is really an inclusiveness of all, which is really not judging that different way of doing things. And by not judging, what I mean is not being in an ego place, because anytime people are in ego, they're competing for whose information is more valid than the other. And so the sociologist professor was like, as long as the debate is between, is it nature or nurture, because the debate with gender and equality and all of things is it nature or nurture. And they were saying, as long as it stays in this place, we're stuck, because they're only evaluating these two options. They're not bringing forth something new. And the same thing goes when you are thinking of humanity with those generalized statements that you learned and began acquiring and began applying with your teenage peer group, and really with your own also data points, because obviously you are driving. We are always driving from the ego. The blind spot, though, is the part of the hurts, the part of you closing off to other information. And really, it's not about closing off as much as it's the feeling, not being able to feel comfortable to talk about other things in different ways with a calmness. Some people, the ones who are already in the space of where they're meant to be, right? So they don't think that anger can be something that is removed. They think it's only going to be, natural, that it can be there and that it can have a specific type of not explosion, but basically ups and downs. So for them, life is made with the ups and downs, and therefore anger is always going to be part of it. And no matter how you explain to them the nervous system's breakdown, the emotional layer, the physiological layer, they have a very specific thought of how life is going to be, which is a generalization, because this ups and downs, this whole approach to emotions, that's exactly where the 3D and 4D stand. Even the 4D, they talk about this shadow self. So if you're going to go through awakening, ascension, enlightenment, you have to go through this dark period. And here's where I giggle more, because at least, for those in that 3D space, it's part of a tangible proof, meaning I've studied sociology. So the aspect of having labels, it's clear. The aspect of having ego groups is clearer. So is with psychologists in the breakdown. And even though with a psychologist, you can go through and understand your own ego. And actually, here's a side note, guys. One of the sociology books I read criticized psychology as an entire subject matter, saying that it held back society. this is to share with you that right there was not only a generalization made by a sociology major, a sociology person. Obviously, that's their opinion. Obviously, that's their ego. Does not discredit that's the whole point. Information is all valuable to the person who has the ability to say it's all valuable, because they're not threatened by information. How do you do that? Because you have an empowered ego, because you're a mature ego, because you're no longer that infant or child or teenager or young adult that thought, wait a minute, maybe somebody knows better than me. And this knows, it's not about the mind, it's the feeling of your body. Every time you're reacting defensively towards the information, you are defending your information. That was that other. So my main reasons, for example, of moving towards that neutrality were, okay, wait, anger doesn't help me function at my best too, but if I'm defending like this, then I'm not firm in the knowledge, because true faith is sense of ease. And in fact, that is the same idea I knew with God and my belief. It's not a feeling of fear. If you have fear, then you don't have faith. And while other people will continue to speak of faith without recognizing the fear component within themselves, because these aren't conversations you have with other people necessarily. You can if you want, but people tend to navigate, again, since there's a majority of 3D, 4D people, they tend to navigate on a surface layer. Whenever I'm having a conversation, I always try my best to express all of the layers, and I still get misunderstood. Unless it's family and close friends, I still get misunderstood. And even close friends at times, I think they're getting me, but then it's shown that they're not. And really, they're refusing as well. Some people are very close-minded. And by close-minded, I mean that they're choosing to think they're right. And those are primarily the ego, insecure people. I have all types of people. We all have all types of people in our lives. That's all about unconditional love. You're not going to remove people from your life because they're not at a specific level with you, so to speak. And by level, it's more about what you're looking for on a mental and emotional level. It is about allowing ourselves to be ourselves, but also others to be themselves. So see here, right here is where a person, if you generalize, let's say, those dynamics, and you're always in a space of discontent with the people around you, what are you really doing? You're only looking at it from the surface. You're not actually looking at your feelings. So see, that's the missing component, and feelings with the body too, though. Because the minute you're like, wait a minute, not only am I, having this feeling, but also my body is inclined to be in this feeling. How about I allow myself to stop judging people using this generalized statement, because it's not really fair, and it doesn't help me to create a whole experience, because you're not actually paying attention to them as they're expressing who they are. And some people have said, but isn't that unfair, because you're doing all the work? So right here is where that 3D 4D comes to place again. And I was just reading again something that comes to mind now, where they were expressing a concept of bringing harmony, right? So bringing light and allowing yourself to be unconditionally loving and then supportive of people, and at a certain point, but make sure you don't give too much. Create your boundaries. Yesterday we talked about that, and I had to laugh because they just basically contradicted what unconditional love is. Unconditional love is not about boundaries. The part where people feel the boundaries is because they're ignoring the emotional and body element, and they're only taking the analysis to the surface, because they're all the information we have. That is the surface. The surface, it's in your mind. It's a thought pattern. So once again, your thought patterns began by the age of 14 months. We know desire. It's egocentric. By the 18-month mark, we know what others want from us. So this is another study with children, and we will be inclined to give that to them. Again, your nervous system's first response when it feels in any way, shape, or form threatened, which as soon as you're born, you're always in this space because you don't know life. So it's not that you're threatened physically, but your body senses you will give to the person what they'd want from you. This study shows. So by 18 months, you know what somebody wants and you'll be inclined to give that. You are looking for that acknowledgement, that sense of comfort. And there's different words that people use, but at the end of the day, you don't know life. And the adult is the one you learn is going to give you what you need. And basically, you're simply responding to what needs to be done so that you may survive, so that you may live. It's all sensorial. You have no thoughts yet. You begin rational brain hemisphere development 3 years on. And here's where the studies have shown that there's magical thinking until 7 or 8. And that until even 4, there's not a way for the child to know. The knowledge is not, it's not logical. They're not actually able to create logical connections. Now see, while the child psychologist will explain this, as an adult, somebody's reading it, what is important for those of you who are looking to pursue inner growth, follow your heart, achieve that empowered ego that we talk about, and your infinite higher human potential space. You were that, as I was that, and this doesn't mean that whatever we were thinking didn't continue to be a part of our lives. And here's where I'll use my personal example. As a child growing up, I still remember little pieces of things. So when I tell you about, God and Jesus and that not casting the stone and turning the other cheek, this is because that is what was imprinted and what my heart felt true and what then kept moving forward. By 8, I knew I want to help people. I knew I wanted to help people to be happy, to live a good life, I wanted to defend people. In fact, lawyer was the first thing I thought, but that was given to me because I talk a lot and I'm very good at debating. So when I tell you guys I used to get very fiery. Like, I was one of those that stuck by the book too, by the way, which is why also the disappointment of leadership is, I know exactly where that comes from. And to this day, I work with the hurt. Because see, this is where generalizations would say, but the system is completely wrong. People are horrible. So again, that's duality. That's going to keep you in 3D, 4D. And that is complete blind spot. Because guess who's the one judging that? You are. You are from your own personal experience. And your personal experience may be the same as somebody else, which is why people will find their ego spiritual and ego-based leaders. And it doesn't mean there's a one person. It can be a concept. Battling anything is where you're staying in a generalization because you're not transcending the feeling of battle. You're not going to allow your mind to be at ease. And that means your emotional brain hemisphere, your flight, fight, your defense mechanism. You are reducing the efficacy of what you can do. I'm trying to also guide those who want to become empowering leaders besides the individual's inner growth journey and following your heart. Because there really is a very big space of knowledge that opens up when you begin to stop thinking of humanity and life with a feeling of fear. I was given the gift of Jesus and God. It is a gift. And today I transcend it completely, knowing that the gift of knowledge will be given to us as our technology evolves. It does not remove the importance and the appreciation and just the love that I have for every moment of what I learned. And here's where, I speak these words and think of the friends I have who are also in the same faith, but they do not represent turn the other cheek or don't cast the other stone. In fact, they represent completely the opposite. And they're always speaking with generalizations, and they're always doing something spiteful when they're in a bad mood. There's people that talk very not nice when they're in a bad mood. They're still in my life. I love them. I know that they're going through something. It's okay. It doesn't hurt me, because to be hurt means that you're not recognizing your own ego, guys. You're only using the judgment, the generalization, based on your societal knowledge that we get taught. If somebody's spiteful, that's a mean human being. When you're taught that, that's on the surface, but when in your heart you know there's more. So for my heart, not only, again, being the love, but I knew, like, wait, there's more. Oh, guess what? Insecure egos. So insecure ego means you don't know that you're being an asshole because you're actually hurt and you're afraid, and so you're really defending yourself is what you're doing, even though it's not about justifying the action. So others will then say, the ones who say, I'm going to fight for justice. I have a couple of people that recently have been going through stuff, and they're like, I'm not going to have that person. I'm going to call them out. I'm going to call them out. And it's like, yeah, you go ahead and call them out, but really you're not, that's not the opportunity that universe life is giving you. Universe life is giving you the opportunity to be loving, one with yourself. The minute somebody does something that's hurtful is the minute that you have the permission to do something about it within your own. But that aspect of being able to be loving towards another is the bigger and greater challenge and the most amazing one, because again, your nervous system's immediately reacting. So you have an opportunity to empower your ego on two levels. On the emotional level, and so to resolve the pain in the sense that you get to think it through, you get to tend to your ego being that you're the love, the sense of security. You get to remove the illusion that that is a threat to your person. You get to remove that generalization, my heart is broken. Yes, our hearts feel that they're like breaking, but they're actually not broken. The heart is a muscle. What is broken is if it's the ego. See, once we have enough of the information, I need to be able to make sense of it so that I can actually apply it when we're talking about broken heart. But what I know is that it has everything to do with our neuroreceptors firing, our nervous system, societal engagement, and fight response, because it goes down the spine. So the nervous system is down the spine. So when I'm visualizing our three main responses, since the freeze pause is at the bottom, even though I'm sure, it's not a specific spot, it's just that the spine, this emotional body shuts down. So your neuroreceptors aren't going to be engaging in feeling. And in fact, these are the people that have that, they're not stimulated on their own. They need to transgress. So this is where the sociopath and the firemen, for example, are ones that have their emotional body shut down. And then we've also talked about the one lady, there's a patient in the Body Keeps the Scorebook, where the lady has been through an accident with the husband, witnessed an accident. And when they're scanning her brain to see how she responds and how she's working through the incident, while the husband feels fear, she is in complete detachment. So when the emotional body's shut down, it's complete detachment. Now, there's two different ways to be in detachment, though, because we've also learned about the reconnective healing, that introduction to that book that I read to you, and how you can be participating while in that detached state. So I'm thinking also of those who meditate. They're not detaching because they're numb from life for having been hurt. So see, the difference is the defense mechanism versus the ability to be in an unconditionally loving space because you have no fear. That sense of comfort is there's no fear. I'm detaching because emotionally there's no involvement, for the ego does not have a threat. And here's where those in different spaces talk about super conscious, and so removing the ego, transcending the ego. We're doing a completely different approach because the ego is a part of your journey. And the minute you start thinking of you as separate pieces of you is the minute you're going to stay in generalized statements and with blind spots to your own ego, because you're actually thinking that you can at some point not have it be a part of you. And it isn't so much that that's not a possibility as much as it is you will create a blind spot when we remove information from our knowledge bank. So let's say you start thinking something's not a part of you. That creates a blind spot. We've talked about this a little bit, which is not about generalizations, but it is. If you remove information, negate information, you create a blind spot because you're actually not allowing yourself to accumulate information. So knowledge, accumulation of it is what gives you more intellectual power. Doesn't mean you remember everything, guys. And in fact, even this magazine says people think of memory as here. I'm going to read this one too. Once a memory is created, it must be stored. Many experts think there are 3 ways we store memories. First, in the sensory stage, see, the body, guys, there's no way. I love it. I love when there's reconfirmation. Then in short-term memory, and ultimately for some memories in long-term memory. Because there is no need for us to maintain everything in our brain, the different stages of human memory function as a sort of filter that helps to protect us from the flood of information that we're confronted with on a daily basis. Sensory memory. The creation of a memory begins with its perception. The registration of information during perception occurs in the brief sensory stage that usually lasts only a fraction of a second. It is your sensory memory that allows a perception such as a visual pattern, a sound, or a touch to linger for a brief moment after the stimulation is over. Short-term memory. After that first flicker, the sensation is stored in short-term memory. Short-term memory has a fairly limited capacity. It can hold about 7 items for no more than 20 or 30 seconds at a time. You may be able to increase this capacity somewhat by using various memory strategies. For example, a 10-digit number may be too much for your short-term memory to hold, but divided into chunks as in a telephone number, it may actually stay in your short-term memory long enough for you to dial the telephone. Likewise, by repeating the number to yourself, you can keep resetting the short-term memory clock. I remember before cell phones, I used to know all my close friends' numbers by heart. Long-term memory, important information, is gradually transferred from short-term memory into long-term memory. The more that you repeat or use the information, the more likely it is to eventually end up in long-term memory or be retained. That's why studying helps people to perform better on tests. Unlike sensory and short-term memory, which are limited and decay rapidly, long-term memory can store unlimited amounts of information indefinitely. And it says people tend to more easily store material on subjects they already know, since the information has more meaning to them and can be mentally connected to related information that is already stored in their long-term memory. That's why someone who has an average memory may be able to remember a greater depth of information about one particular subject. Most people think of long-term memory when they think of memory itself, but most experts believe information must first pass through sensory and short-term before it can be stored as long-term. So before you even get to long-term, it has to mean something to you, which is why anything that we, discuss, it'll be the pieces that are most, they trigger. And see here again, sensory. I love it. Sensory. Your feelings, that input of where you felt safe or not. And then your own inclination when you began thinking about things as a child is what began developing. And here's where my goal of human and helping humanity, this is the place. So when they were saying you store information, that's why there's different pieces of information that explain human behavior, and it isn't only about the sociology or the psychology or the existentialism. The neuroscience is important, the physiology is important, and connecting it to our day-to-day is important. So the ego, if you think of it ever as it not being a part of you, that's where you create a blind spot. And here's why the experts that share with us information, I know that some are doing their best to actually support an expansion of you. And I get to add that other piece. Just remember that the ego is a part. And so when you are using generalizations, it's not about not using them, because they are existing for a reason, right? They exist because our study of humanity has brought them forth. But when you stay locked into them as if they were the one truth, and that's the part that creates the blind spot, is that people think of them as the one truth because they use it. It's like it becomes like the cliche. And so our brain, it needs to save energy for different things that it does, including allowing our organs to work, right? It's like a lot of things. The flight-fight response has a portion of energy, and so neural pathways are our seats of highway, which is where we create habits. When you're defending your specific passion, that's where you're headed, which is why if you work with the emotion, you help yourself to open up to more. So when we look at the definition of generalizations, Merriam-Webster, the act or process of generalizing, a general statement, law, principle, or proposition. Generalizations are common and something people are used to, yet they render the uniqueness of each person, situation, or thing that is being generalized invisible. This is the other aspect of generalizations that, at least for me, was always a trigger. Like, to generalize as a concept, okay, but to actually think that they are the only way, it's very silly, because when you begin interacting with different people, from the minute you are, if you have siblings, if you have family members, and then you compare them, let's say, to somebody else, watch them defend their uniqueness. How many of you guys have been boxed into a generalization and reacted to defend yourself? Why were you defending yourself? Because you feel unique. And you are unique. We all are unique. And here's where, when people want to generalize, if anything, let's generalize. We're all unique. And so let's stop making generalizations and thinking that we're not. And let's actually recognize that blind spot, which is you are always coming from the ego, which means from your own opinions, which means from your own also feelings, which means from your own culture, own background, things that are important to you, your own identity. And that's your first space. So paying attention to the body helps for those who want to achieve an empowered ego self and pursue more of that inner growth and expansion. You begin to apply that in every way, shape, or form as you encounter quote-unquote conflict. And what I mean by conflict, feelings that are not in flow. And it isn't about doubting you or doubting others. You actually want to transcend those very generalized statements. So when we talk about people and they're being deceitful or spiteful or any of those actions that usually begin, again, from the minute you are little. I told you guys, the community knows about the story when I was a kid. So there's two incidences where I remember my mind, where I got really angry, I guess you could say. But once it was in my an Italian school I was at, and it was to defend a generalized statement on Americans. And before that, though, was with a child that was at my birthday party who threatened to take back a gift they had given to me. And the only reason I remember that, one is a bit because my mom told me, but I did remember it because I remember clearly having been taught you don't take back something you give. So they had threatened me. They had said, I will take back. So it was two things they did. They threatened to take something that they gave me. So they were doing something wrong, but they're also threatening me, my person. And so I dragged the little girl down the stairs by her hair. And that was the only thing. And then this other incident. Other than that, when I'm thinking back, it was like, no, wait, I don't want to be that, right? I want to be loving and kind. That's not something that you should do. So we all get taught not to be aggressive. Obviously, there's those who instead are taught to defend themselves. It always depends on the environment. Either way, we're not discussing right or wrong. We're actually conceptualizing, again, the aspect of memory, the aspect of ego, the aspects that are part of us from the minute we begin to interact with life, because it isn't only now as the adult. There are conversations, for anybody who's new, they involve all the aspects, because we're not reminded of us being our own individual. Sometimes I see people talking about, yes, when you're a child, but they only talk about it with the trauma, not expressing, okay, let's expand on this. Let's talk about your nervous system's response. Let's talk about what this trauma can mean and your subconscious and conscious. And let's move beyond it by allowing you to know that you will achieve complete state of ease with it if you process once more and again the experience with a different feeling. To make that happen, there has to be neutrality, and many will go to forgiveness. But here we've discussed forgiveness still keeps you locked in a specific feeling. So you, who wants to empower the ego, achieve a sense of, I don't need to forgive anybody. They didn't do anything quote unquote wrong. They were being their ego. I'm being my ego. Really, there's no physical life threat. We're breaking down the use of our flight fight to only what it actually was serving us in the first place, and still serves us and will serve us, to defend our physical life, and removing the cognitive dissonance emotional reaction, which is what people in the expertise area only use when people are not within the societal cultural norm or mass, the ones that some people say are sheep. Every person, if we have to go down that path, then I'll say every person that is not an empowered ego is a sheep, even if they seem that they're wolf. The ones that are wolf are the ego mind and spiritual ego-based leader, and then everybody else is the sheep. But that would be untrue if you go and talk to every one of them. And this is where the nervous system society engagement response comes into play again. So the individual who's empowered is not needing to do this type of pointing game. In fact, the only people that do this type of pointing game vocally with each other are those who are still in ego. The wiser, enlightened individual, the intellectual individual, is an individual who understands that this reality, being a realistic person, a lot of concepts that are discussed will depend on who you're talking to. And so generalizations, they exist on a wide scale, but they also exist on a societal, ego-based group scale. And then there's the person who wants to actually be their own person and will recognize, wait a minute, not, these generalizations they support, but they only support if I'm staying open to other new types of information. People get locked into the generalizations because our mind, the brain of ours, it conserves energy. So once again, we have neural pathways. And our nervous system's main response when identity, ego, is threatened is societal engagement. And you have a foundation, your human elements. You have been given your first societal imprint from your family. That's very important. Even with the worst family background, they are still the first who gave you the sense of security or insecurity. It will still, on a certain level, affect you. The minute you begin thinking, even if it's your own thinking, they're the ones who are going to tell you the stories, then you're the one who can relate back. But it's all if you're paying attention to the body and emotional layer, as you're also evaluating the mental layer, and instead of focusing on what the outside is doing, you're actually saying, okay, where's my blind spot here? Where's my ego? Where's my ego? And here, let me move beyond this generalization, because it's not the only potential variable. It is one that is repeated over and over and over again in different ways, but it's the same, so staying in duality, staying in a space of I do know that there's only one truth or 10 truths is what creates blind spots for all people. But for those who are wanting to transcend it, this is where you can keep yourself in a very specific place of open-mindedness. If you remember, I don't want to use generalizations because they don't support the truth, which is there's more than just one generalization. And again, it's going to translate in however way you allow that to stay in your awareness. But essentially, as you choose not to be reactive from the ego self, but to say, okay, when the conflict arises, when the emotional aspect on those sides of getting very, very passionate arises, I'm going to calm myself emotionally to disengage from flight, fight, societal engagement, and to actually evaluate new information without need, because it doesn't represent a physical life threat to your identity. This is the part. And others that defend this specific type of battle, they don't have the unconditional love streak for humanity. They have a generalization for humanity. And I will say this, I'm pretty sure they're not tuning in here today, because to inspire human potential means you believe that humans can and do have a higher potential, and you have a good feeling about humanity. I chose the name. One, it's indicative of what I want to do and do every day with the inner growth program, the following your heart, the mindset, everything. But it was also done because the people that will match, they will think the same way. They will think about humanity with love in their heart. And even though there is always ego, this is the thing. It's not a bad. Ego's not bad. And learning to be yourself is the aspect of learning. You're not a bad human being. So getting back to people in those teenage years, the deceit, the lies, the cheating, things that people as adults still experience and they still talk about in similar ways. For those of you who want to transcend, again, generalizations, and so you can remove these blind spots, here are various aspects for you to consider. When I began our conversation, it was very strong because there's a very specific way that I see people using what has hurt them from their teenage years to their young adults based on concepts that have been taught to us it could have been differently taught, but let's just put that to the side. It's almost like watching a movie where there have been created many illusions and ideas of a threat. So when somebody thinks of being sabotaged by somebody else, to me, the fact that you can allow that idea to even be a part of your potential in life is giving away power already. And that's where the power of your life is always in your hands. Those who have this idea, though, that the external has an effect on it, and that's why that's the 3D, 4D space, guys. And people will hold that for the unknown elements of life and humanity. And particularly, though, it is within observing how people interact with each other, because there's hurt, because there's society engagement. So we are always interacting, and when people are always getting emotional, they are always actually they're being given the opportunity to love one, but they're also interacting and tending to each other's ego's needs, because they're doing what they did as an infant, but now they're an adult. And they're also justifying, each side justifies their side. Now, there is a way. Somebody would say, well, isn't there a right way? Well, the right way is a loving way. The right way is a calm way. And it's only right because you're actually thinking clearly if you're in a space of flow. If you're in a space of I'm loving, and meaning I'm me, then I'm dealing with something else. Let us both, achieve this space of harmony. Let us both try and talk it out. The right way is when you're respecting you and you're respecting the other. The right way is when you're not generalizing the outcome of life without acknowledging that there's always the unknown, that there's always tomorrow. So the right way would be to acknowledge there's an infinite number of things that we don't know, and that can be and might not be, and that we are obviously, as conscious beings, in a place of not happiness with the unknown. There's fear. The body immediately sensed an outside world, and that's why the body's important, because you immediately can bring yourself to a place of ease as you're acknowledging that dealing with people and life is not a physically life-threatening situation, but that it is a mental and emotional situation. The body, yes, but if you start allowing yourself to relax it, that's where you're going to allow yourself to begin a sense of ease. Then you evaluate the ego of you with the mind and heart. And it isn't by sticking to, I know what's right or wrong. That's why the love is part of the equation and neutrality. It's by saying, as Carl Jung puts it, this is where transcendent function happens. So you acknowledge you have a specific perspective. You have an ego that was hurt. You have all of your parts. You acknowledge all of them with neutrality, meaning you're not thinking of you as right or wrong. That's the first way you're going to remove any blind spot, because you're like, wait a minute, this is mine. And the next step is about the other. The other can be humans or it can be life. And so here's where, for the individuals, when you've first experienced the heartbreak, the deceit, the spitefulness, what were you taught? And then what was your inclination? And so I'll use me as an example. I was taught, and I definitely knew about right and wrong, but I definitely also knew I wanted to be unconditionally loving the way Jesus taught me to be, because that's the thing. So I wasn't going to cast a stone. I wasn't going to judge some other person, but I was going to, one, not respond with the same coin, and then two, of course, I'm going to defend me, meaning if that person lied to me, if that person's trying to be, they don't respect me, they speak to me in a bad way, I'm going to do what I can to ensure that I don't give my time, I don't give my thoughts, I don't give any part of me. But neutrality, guys, here's where, when you're aware of the subconscious and conscious, you know that the ego, of course, there's a bruise. So you're going to take the time to tend to it. And here's where people as teenagers begin to instead cling to the identity and the generalizations. As an individual who believes we're all unique and understood that this ego is about hurt, there was a double validation for why there was no need to be mean back, one, but two, it was a simple matter of choosing. Okay, they're hurt, let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can work through it. But it was because there was never a threat. There's no physical threat. Somebody lying, cheating, stealing, it's not right, it's wrong, they'll be punished. This is what I also know, that the law, whether perfect or not, will always come and take care of things. Even though as you get older, right here, generalizations, as a kid, you think the law is always going to be on the right side. Those who tune in again know the story. But when I realized that lawyers didn't follow the law, it was very humorous. I was 18. And so I had chosen to pursue law until I realized, okay, wait, I can't remember everything. But also I realized that they don't defend always the good guys. Like, there's actually a lot of corruption. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is not unconditional love. This is wrong, and I was like, okay, this is, interesting. These two lawyers, that I met, the first two lawyers I met, they both did drugs. And I'm like, wait a minute, but they're supposed to defend the law. They're supposed to be, with the law. Like, how is that possible? So that was where naivete, I guess you could say, was present. But to me, it is a person who's committing to what they are choosing to be. And right here we have that other part. As teenagers, the identity that kids start getting is not about their work. I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up, so I was very focused. The kids are doing what kids do. So they get to embark on a journey, and some of them will do what the parents had guided them to do. Others are more of a rebel, right? So they're going to do things in a very different way. Either way, we all get that friend that is cheating on you or lying to you. Like, everyone has had the area of disappointment. My first area of disappointment, quote unquote, was realizing that adults don't commit to stuff, and that, this idea of law that I thought was in a place of unconditional love and justice was not at all. In fact, I was like, okay, time to reconsider. But here's where generalized statements were part of the verbiage for sure as I gained more information. And the minute I got to neutrality was the minute the generalizations became very visible, the blind spots that they had created. And not from a way of being naive, from a way of being able to, one, be that unconditional love, but two, to intellectually see more. Because see, again, when your mind is open, because your body is not threatened, so you're not inclined to do societal engagement, which means you're not using only the repeat information that your long-term memory has identified as those truths, and that gets added up. So everybody has a perspective. This helped a lot. We all have in our minds, in our hearts really, what the world is. Even though you get taught it, you're being taught a filter, but you are already reacting I'll use me as that example. Unconditional love is my core. That is it. That is how I got to this space. Somebody else may say it's fire, or upset at humanity, or like a specific calling. You guys use what comes to your mind. I know for me it's a feeling, and in fact, if anything, I would say focus on the feeling, because it's not the label. Like when I said I wanted to be a lawyer, it wasn't because I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to help people. When I then went to political science, this is about political science. I want to help people. Like the matter of having to define it, it was the societal requirement. But my goal, my profession, I want to help people. This is that aspect that others did not necessarily go on their own path unless you already had the calling. And if you did, then you, like me, you continued to follow it, and it's your feeling. Remember, I told you about the story of this one person that I had met, and they were finishing up their law degree. This was way after. And I asked them why they wanted to be a lawyer. And here's a generalization right here, based on societal structure. They basically gave me a visual, and it was them looking good in a suit and basically having a specific type of status with society. So their value as a human being, and in fact this person is quite insecure, is one of the ones that gossips about people and is spiteful. And see, here's where people will say that's a mean person. When you call somebody mean, it always makes me think of power, even though I know that, again, people use it this way, but somebody who is not powerful. They're not mean. They represent no threat. In fact, if anything, they represent the exact opposite. They represent a person who is an ego that is insecure. And as long as society keeps on using these generalized statements for those actions, this is exactly where there's not a transcendence 1 to 5D space, but really there's a fallacy at play. That person, the minute you say anything, if you want, in a specific way, you've shattered their world. Nobody should really do that. But that's why when I actually think of leadership, and just I think of people and a lot of individuals that have similar traits, and then there's those who get arrogant and even cocky, thinking that they are better than others. They don't really realize that they're not. They exist in a world that allows them to continue to exist, and if anything, they don't represent a threat. So again, their actions are for books. Textbooks talk about them. Textbooks explore them, and then we get to review, do you want to integrate it or not? But the generalization already, if you exclude yourself from being potentially a part of that, you're going to create a blind spot. Inclusion, we're all humans. We all have ego. Inclusion allows you not to ever think that you have a different way of navigating the world. We all come from ego, which is why neutrality and unconditional love are essential, because that's the minute you're not going to impose that ego, but you're going to keep a very specific eye on it. But it won't be because you're afraid of making a mistake or hurting or involving, because see, here's where you're leading your life from your heart. Here's where you're actually always pursuing inner growth, and you're not keeping a checklist of the people that have lied to you or are spiteful. That's the whole thing. You're actually knowing what you're dealing with. They're no threat. If anything, you should quote unquote pity them, but even there's no pity. For once you achieve a specific level of that inner growth program, impartiality in the advanced place, you begin to have a detached state, but not from freeze pause. It's a knowledge from the own mind and heart that ego is going through their life, and anytime they're holding on and staying in the space with that hurt feeling, the only person who they're hurting is themselves. Others will go, the ones who think they're fighting for justice. So they'll go and say, I'm going to go and point out to this person. And so there's a particular couple of individuals that do this repeatedly. I've known them my entire lifetime, okay? And I've told them many times, and we agree to disagree, because I've said, people don't change. You're not going to change somebody by pointing. There's no justice in what you're doing. You're spitting out a specific feeling. You're also invading a specific space, and really you're applying your idea. So it's not a generalized statement, but then again, it is based on their conceptualization of everything that took place and their idea that they're going to bring justice. The blind spot is they're driving from their ego, their identity, their thought of what is right or wrong, and going to another and using their time. So see, that's the time that is wasted for an individual who wants to actually live their own life and be your own self. So to you guys, that is your energy, because emotions, energy in motion, but it's also your brain, your thinking brain, and it's your actual being. Like, you are giving attention and time and brain and like everything to another person, versus seeing where you are being reactive with defense mechanism. And instead of doing that, saying, wait a minute, but this person, this thing doesn't represent a threat to my life. The idea that you help the world, because this is where these people need to know. This is where that generalization, it makes me think of movies. One human being who's being spiteful is not the issue. Our issue in the world is, for example, we need to get right with our environment. We need to work with our prison system and legal system so that we can stop, creating perpetual situation. We need to help homelessness. We need to help abused children. Those are all things that require important attention, focus, and time, which would require human beings to stop actually, quote unquote, wasting their time using their energy, brain, and days, because to go and do that thing, you're going to use your time. But before you even get there, because what is life, guys? So right here, life is our social interactions. As a teenager, you begin that. And this is why when I begin actually taking a step back, I just remember most people, they're living that day-to-day life as a teenager. They get to become an adult, and so they're called an adult, which is why it's not surprising when somebody will say, oh my gosh, do you know what happened today at work? And they describe to me an entire situation with the entire exact way that they would have talked about it as a teenager, only now they're an adult. So they have a bit more experience, and now they are thinking they're right. So obviously, this is the way it's going to be always, because yada yada. And that's about it. And so every time they might go through the same thing. That's one way you can live life. And the 3D and 4D community will continue perhaps to do that. That 5D individual is the one who has a very interesting life, because you're pursuing your passions. You're not using moments with people in that way. You're actually using it to spread love, but also to grow from within if there are still active reactions that are not in a place of love. And here I wanted to tell you guys, it's funny about the unconditional love, because having transcended and moved beyond the solely religion, and so spirituality, but also science with energy and the cosmos and just this unknown, and just leaving it at that, I still get reconfirmation whenever I start getting a bit I start sharing with the universe and God, like, the aspects of people and ego, these blind spots, because the blind spot is what creates more hurt amongst individuals. Generalizations allow people as adults to get cocky because they think that that's how the world runs, but they're not the ones who are saying it. The experts, the leadership is the one breaking it down. That's why we have pop psychology. I mean, to this day, it is beyond me because of the love of knowledge I have and the allowance. So when we have conversations with people personally, and I present this aspect of how, knowledge is shared in this limited way, many will justify it. They will justify it based on the breakdown of how the human brain works, which is that aspect where we are organized in a specific way with neural pathways, mirror neurons, with the energy that is conserved for the flight fight, and so that people will always stay in specific places, that people don't like change, and that people are in ego. And here's where they're justifying that very aspect, and they're actually limiting the entire human potential, which is hilarious because our brains are malleable. And so even in this article, I didn't read all of it. Again, I don't want to bore you. It says if you practice things with your brain, you will be able to, work with it. And here's why it gets me, because one, the individual themselves, as they are justifying the system and the way that they're doing things, they're also justifying it because they're calling humans sheep, basically. And in automats, we know the generalized statements that are made of humanity because they're very widespread. The thing is, they're human too, which is why another one of those areas, like, I'm a human and I'm proud, very much, and the mind is actually not limited at all. Here's where it always made me really, but you're part of it, and the blind spot. Yeah, but it's different. We're different. Ego again, guys. We're different. No, we're all human. We're all different. We're all unique. If everybody allowed that to be versus staying in their ego with generalized statements, well then, we'd have a lot more interesting conversations. Then again, the vibration. Remember when we talk about different vibrations and states of consciousness? So here's where I'm assuming there will be an eventual place of unconditional love. And that will be a place of specific type of union with differences. It's not that we all become the same. Otherwise, that would be oneness, and that would mean the energies that we would vibrate in one energy, which means we would not be aware of ourselves. And so anybody who's new and has never heard of these terms, so 3-dimension, 4-dimension, 5-dimension, look them up in quantum physics, which is a new science. It's considered a new science. And then you can look it up in the spirituality community if you want. But essentially, for the 5D space, it's any individual who is living their life in a way that leads from heart, but only holds the feeling of unconditional love and light. So there is no threat. There is no fear. And while the concept as it is expressed is quite different, we try to apply it every day with the self-empowerment of ego, because essentially it is what that is. For you to experience unconditional love and not have fear of the external is not a concept that is only this word. It is where your body is involved with your nervous system's immediate response. So your nervous system is immediately in a defense mode. Remember that. Side engagement, which is your first trigger, is going to be a part of your identity for as long as you are allowing generalizations to stand as the one truth, so duality to stand, and not transcend thoughts and feelings with neutrality and unconditional love. The minute instead you're going to allow that is the minute you're going to move to a next space, and with those generalizations you get to know you. Then you get to know the ego and the hurts and the fears and any element which will be also in the unknown elements of life. And you get to choose to follow your heart.